Hey, welcome back. This is Jana. And what follows is going to be the bind off at the bottom of the body of our sweater after we did those 4 inches of garter stitch. So I'm going to show you my simple bind off, basic bind off across the bottom, and then how I like to weave in the end on the bottom corner of my sweater. And then we'll move on to picking up the sleeves. So let's get to it. All right, so the basic bind off that I like to use is just simply a way to knit a stitch and then combine it with the next stitch by pulling it over the top so that we can bind this off in a neat row. So what you want to do first is just go in and knit the first stitch and make sure to, leave it a little bit more loose, and you'll see why in a moment. And then we're going to knit the second one as well. And then you're going to go underneath the first one with your left hand needle and pull it right over the top. Okay, so then you've combined 2 into 1. So then you just simply knit the next one, go into that first one and pull it over the top. Whoops, being careful not to split a stitch. And then if you'll notice, I just gave that a little tug so that I'm pulling through a little more working yarn than normally I would, because I want to make that a little bit bigger, knowing that it has to go off over the top of the next stitch. So then you're going to knit the next one, pull that over the top. Whoops, there you go. Knit the next one, go in underneath with your left needle and slip that over the top. And then you just continue on doing that. But you can see how that's, making a nice finished edge there. You don't want to make it too tight because you don't want it to pucker. So that's the point of pulling through that little extra millimeter maybe of working yarn to make it nice and loose, so you don't have any pucker. See, I pull a little through here, pull a little extra through so it doesn't pucker. On the other hand, you don't want it too loose and sloppy, so that just takes a little practice to work out your own personal tension with that. Okay. All right, I'm coming down to these last few stitches, and then when I get to the other end here, the other corner of the bottom of my sweater, I'll show you how I choose to tidy things up and tie this off and then weave in the ends. Okay, so I'm down to the last two stitches. And what I normally do here is, go ahead and do the last one just like you normally would. Pull that over the top, and then you're left with this. You're just left with a loop coming through. I simply trim this off, 4 or 5 inches away, and hopefully you have a scissors that's a little sharper than mine. And then I just pull this through, but that seems, it seems kind of loose and a little funky. So what I like to do is just take a darning needle, and I'll actually kind of tie a little overhand knot into the next row down below. I just go into the area just below that final stitch that I pulled through, or, wherever seems convenient to you. And I pull that through, but don't pull it all the way through. I put my finger in there, so I kind of prevent that. And then I go back through so that I'm actually going to make a little knot. And I just snug that right on up so it's not very noticeable. And then I take my tail end and weave it right down the very edge. So again, it's not then. Now the other option you could do too is go into this first garter row and then weave your tail end in and out of that garter ridge bump, which actually might be a little less obtrusive than what I was about to do. So I think I'll choose that because I'm the boss. So I'm just going to go in and out of this garter stitch ridge and hide the tail end that way. Okay. Now this is actually the right side of my work, and I don't want to leave the tail end on the right side. And so I'm going to go ahead and weave that in a couple more times, and then make sure that I pull it through on the wrong side of my work. Okay, so you can see the garter stitch bumps there. I'm going to go ahead and go in and out another time or two, and then duck all the way in. And I'm going to pull that through so that if there's any little tiny bit that you'd be able to tell, it would be on the back side. So I'll cut that off, and then I'll show you how we're going to begin the sleeve portion of our sweater. All right, we've finished binding off the bottom of the hem, and now we're ready to pick up the stitches that we put on this waste yarn and get going knitting the sleeves. So I'm going to go ahead and undo my little bow here so that we can put these stitches back on either double pointed needles or 16-inch circular or a magic loop if you prefer. So whatever you prefer. And also you want to switch back to the larger size now. So if you were using 6s and 8s, 8 for your larger size body, not the trim at the bottom, but if you switch back to the larger size, whatever that was for you. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and switch back, and then we're going to go along and we're going to pick up these stitches. All right, I've put back on my size 8s. And I'm going to start at the bottom of the sleeve, and then with the my work on the left, because I want to be able to slide the stitches. I want to slip as if to purl, and I want to put them right back on the proper way without twisting them. So, I mean, I suppose you could start on this side if you wanted to and go around. It just occurs to me to be the most straightforward way to, to slip them back on. So I just do, 4 or 5 at a time, and then I pull my waste yarn through, and I kind of use the waste yarn, I kind of use that to hold up the stitches so I can get my needle in without splitting them. So, I suppose you could yank the whole thing through like this if you wanted to, and I may do some of that just so I don't have so much of a tail to pull through. So hopefully that makes sense. Just go all the way around and slip these stitches back onto your right hand needle. So I have all the stitches back on my magic loop here. And we're going to join back up with our new yarn. We're going to knit across these stitches. So all I'm going to do is kind of hang on here to my working yarn, and I'm going to just go knit across all of these. And then we're going to pick up the stitches that are underneath the arm here. So I'm literally just going to knit into it, and it's going to feel really kind of funky and loose, but we'll take care of that in a moment. Don't worry too much about it. This is the perfect time though to if you're going to do magic loop, you may want to pick a spot up at the top here to pull your cable through to do magic loop, and I'm going to do that here in a moment. I really like my magic loop to be divided exactly in half. So I'm going to wait to determine exactly the halfway point until we pick up those bottom stitches and I know exactly how many stitches I have. So for now I'm just going to kind of estimate really. And I'm going to pinch my cable and I'm going to pull that through to create my magic loop. Okay. So I've got my magic loop sort of in the half up at the top and then here at the beginning. And if you're using double pointed needles, then obviously that doesn't apply to you. Or if you're using a smaller, 12 or 16-inch circular, depending on the size of the sweater that you're knitting. All right, we've knitted our way around, and now the instructions at the top of page 5 indicate that we need to pick up 4 stitches along this area of the underarm, and then place a marker to denote the beginning of the round, and then pick up 4 more stitches. But I have to say, when I look at this, I could pick up 4 stitches and end up about right here, but I am afraid when I look at this and I kind of, simulate how that will be, I'm afraid I'm going to have a hole right there. So I'm going to choose to pick up at least 1 or 2 more. So, you do what you feel works best for you. I would rather have an extra couple of stitches that I'm going to decrease than have the risk of a hole there. So I'm going to go ahead and go in underneath this first, if you can see this first spot right here, okay? And I picked it up from back to front, and I'm going to slip it onto my left-hand needle as if it were a knit stitch. Then I'm going to knit into the back loop so that I'm actually twisting it. All right, then I'm going to go here, and I'm probably going to pick up another one like that. All right, then I'm going to go and pick up my 4. So I will probably have done a couple extra, maybe even 2 or 3 extra stitches that I'm picking up as I go along. So when I pick up the stitches, I look to see, I want to go underneath right here, and I want to you know, pick up underneath both legs of that stitch and then pull my yarn, knit into that and pull my loop through, okay? I'm going to go about halfway across, and I may end up counting my stitches and, you know, rearranging where I put my beginning of the round marker after I see exactly how many stitches I have. But we'll go ahead and put that on there for an estimate of the midpoint or the beginning of the round, where that would be now. Okay, so I'll show you how I'm going to adjust for adding these extra stitches. We'll look ahead in the pattern and we'll see after this section how many stitches I'm supposed to have for my count going around the first portion of the sleeve. So I'm going along and I'm just picking up however many I need to, actually. Now, here is where I knitted to start with, and I actually did another little half hitch around there so that I wouldn't lose this tail. So I'm going to hang on to that just a second, and I'm going to pick up right up to it. And then I'm going to choose to actually take that little tail end of where I started, and I'm going to secure that by tying it onto my working yarn right here. And I know that's kind of crude and elementary, but it's on the inside, and I definitely want that to be secure. So I'm actually just tying a little square knot right there, and it's going to be on the inside of the bottom of the sleeve. So that's not going to be noticeable at all. All right, so I've done the pick it up part where it says pick up and knit 4 stitches, place marker for the beginning of the round at the underarm, and then pick up another 4 stitches, knit around the sleeve again, ending at the beginning of the round where I put the marker. So I'll go ahead and knit around, and I'm going to go ahead and count them. I will have more than my instructions say that I should. I'll go ahead and knit around, and then I'll show you how I'm going to adjust to correct the number of stitches. All right, after I knitted around and I counted how many stitches I have, for the size I'm making, I'm supposed to have 61 stitches. I actually have 69. I picked up several extra, not just a couple, but that's okay. So I'm, just for this portion of the sleeve, I'm gonna ballpark it for this 66 to 70. I'm gonna go ahead and follow the instructions for the 70 stitch size, knowing that I have one fewer. And so just bear with me here. Now it says knit in rounds, go round and round until I have 6 inches from the underarm. Or if I'm going to follow for the larger size for a moment because I have more stitches, then I'm going to do it until I have, let's see, 5 inches from the underarm. Okay, so I'm just going to knit round and round and round now until I'm 5 inches from where I started at the underarm. Okay. I'm measuring to see if I've got my 5 or 6 inches knitted here. I've got 5 and a little bit, so we'll go with that. Okay, if we read ahead here, I'm just going to pause a moment and say, don't be super concerned about my alteration and my extra stitches, because what's going to happen is we're going to decrease around. We're going to knit a decrease every 6, 7, or 5 rounds. We're going to decrease away 2 more stitches. So because I had more stitches than the pattern called for, because I picked up some extra ones, all that means is I'm going to knit this decrease round every 5 rounds until I get down to the number of stitches that I want to have for the pattern size that I need, which for me would be this 45. So for adult sizes, you're going to continue to decrease every however many rounds, right, until you get down to the stitch count that you're aiming for. So in my case, I want to have 45 stitches. So that just means because I picked up more and I'm starting with 69, I'm going to choose to decrease every like 5 rounds. I'll knit this decrease round every 5 times I go around until I get down to my target number of stitches. Okay, so you can play with that, fudge that a little bit. And then you're just going to knit round and round until you get to the length of the sleeve that you want. And I know that my sister has longer arms than this pattern calls for, so I'm going to want hers to be more like that 17 inches because she measured for me and told me that. So I knit one, I'm going to slip as if to knit, slip as if to knit, go in underneath, and simply knit that off, which is essentially knitting that through the back loop. Okay, now we'll go ahead and knit all the way around to the other side until we get to 3 stitches before the end of the round. And I'm going to get to where I'm down to 3 stitches left on my needle, and then I'm simply going to knit 2 together and then knit the last one, and that's my beginning of the round. Now, because I'm doing magic loop, I don't have a beginning of the round marker, but I mean, I can tell, that's okay. I can tell I'm at the bottom, the underarm of the sleeve, as opposed to, you know, the top of the yoke where the collar is. So it's really not necessary to have a stitch marker unless you are knitting maybe on a circular and you feel like you can't tell where you're at, or you just want that for your added reassurance. That's totally fine. So I've done 1 decrease round, and now according to the pattern, I'm going to knit 5 plain ones. I'm going to turn to my work here, and I'm going to knit 5 plain rounds until I do another decrease round. And I'm carry on in that way until, like I said, I'm down to my target number of stitches. If you're knitting a child size, then you just follow along for the specific instruction there. As always, let me know if you have any questions at all by commenting here, posting in the Facebook group or the Ravelry group. You know, whatever works best for you. I check all 3 of those places daily. All right, there's a couple of things I want to point out. One is that as you're going round and round, you're going to want to keep track of how many rows you've done between your decreases, either on a row counter or maybe on a little piece of paper where you can see. But one thing I want to point out is if you lose your paper or your row counter, you can plainly see where your decrease is. You can tell that the row below, the one that we just did, was where I'm trying to get a hold of this to show you. The row below, you can see where we knitted 2 together right there. Okay, can you see that, where we've knitted 2 together right here? And then this is the row that we just did. So we know we've done 1 plain round. So you can see to count up if you lose track, but I would recommend just making hash marks on a piece of paper or using a row counter, or there's apps that you can get on your phone or whatever. So you want to keep track of that so you don't end up tinking back or forgetting how many plain rows you did since your last decrease. Okay, I've completed all my decreasing rounds, and you can see the sleeve gets narrower. This little bit right here is just an end that I need to weave in where I had to join a new skein. But you can see actually on the underside, so you can see that that's slip knit, and then there's 5 rows, and then that's a slip knit, and that's a slip knit. So yes, it is visible, but this is, keep in mind, on the underside of the arm. So if I look back at my pattern here, so now I'm going to continue knitting until my sleeve measures the correct distance. And my sister actually measured her arm for me, and so mine is going to be more than 16 inches from the underarm, or the total desired length. So I'll look at what I wrote down for her total measurement, and then I will subtract the 4 inches from that, because then that's when we'll save back those 4 inches of length to do our garter cuff that will match the bottom hem. So all I need to do now is knit round and round and round until I have the length overall that I want that is 4 inches shy of my total sleeve length that I'm after. So I'm just going to continue knitting around and round until I'm ready to start the cuff. I've measured my sleeve now, and it's the right length to add my 4 inches of cuff. And so when we did the cuff before on the body, we just knitted every row because we were going back and forth. So you can do a garter stitch that way by knitting every row if you're knitting back and forth. But now we're knitting in the round, and so we need to be mindful of that. And so what we want to do now is switch to our smaller needles, and then round 1 indicates knit, and round 2 is purl. So while I'm switching my needles here, I'll just say these interchangeable set of needles that I'm using here is from Knit Picks. And so I'll drop a link in the video description below if you're interested in that. And I just want to point out that, when you're, like I said a moment ago, when you're knitting garter stitch back and forth, as we did at the bottom of the body, you can just knit, 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 because you're alternating which side of your work is facing you. When you're knitting, the right side's facing you, and then when we turn our work, when we did the body, then the wrong side was facing you. So when we're knitting in the round, since the right side always faces you, then you need to alternate whether you're knitting or purling. So easy as pie, just round 1 is knitting, round 2 is purling, and you're going to do that for either 3 or 4 inches depending upon what size you're knitting. And then you're just going to bind off your stitches in the same way, that same simple bind off that we did on the lower part of the body. All right, I finished my garter stitch cuff, and now I'm going to show you the simple bind off one more time. And this is the same bind off that we did at the bottom of the body of our sweater. So you're just going to go in, knit the first stitch, and then just knit the second one kind of loosely, and then put your left needle underneath the first one and pull it over the top of your second one. Now I just give a little bit of a tug so I have a little more working yarn and my loop is a little bigger, just slightly, so that it's not tight. And you're just doing this loosely so that everything lays flat and nothing is puckered or tense. So you're just going to continue like this all the way around. All right, I've bound off until I have just one stitch left on the needle. So all I'm going to do here is cut this a couple, I don't know, probably 2 or 3 inches away. And then I'm simply going to draw that through. Now you'll notice there's this little bit of a jog because this is the round that came around. So what I like to do to kind of tie all that together and mitigate that vertical jog, I'm just going to attach thread my darning needle here, and I just go in the next stitch underneath the jog, and I pull that through, and then I go ahead and go back into that same stitch. See, it probably would have been helpful if I left a little bit more of length, but that's okay. I'm just going to do a little quick overhand knot right there, but I'm going to tighten this up pretty well. Actually, I'm going to loosen this so that it ends up being a little closer. I want the knot to be as close as I can make it to that first stitch. So then what I'll do, see, I kind of closed that gap there, and then what I'll do is weave in this tail down the inside so that it's pretty well invisible. So all I do is choose a purl bump, a vertical line of purl bumps like this, and I just go all the way down, I don't know, an inch or so at least to secure that. There we go. And then I'll just trim that off closely, and there you have your sleeve. Okay, so now the only other thing I want to point out, you're going to switch your needles back now to the larger size and go pick up and knit the other one, making sure that both are the same. So one thing you can do is start where you picked up, and you can measure. Absolutely, you want to measure. You can count rows if you can determine how many rows of knitting that you have, but you just want to make sure that your other side is exactly the same as the first. All right, as always, if you find these videos helpful, like and subscribe to our channel, and be sure to leave a comment or let me know if you have any questions at all in the Facebook group, the comments here, or the Ravelry group.